Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first Ask a Physicist of the fall semester. Just like last year, we will continue to host these interactive webinars on the last Monday of the month at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and we will post them afterwards on our Beyond Center YouTube channel. And as a reminder, you can always submit your questions in advance via email, or if you have a question during the webinar, just use the Q&A feature within Zoom. Lastly, just make sure that you are subscribed to our email list or you follow us on social media so that you don't miss any of our future announcements about topics or information on registration links. So with that, I will turn it over to the director of the Beyond Center, Paul Davies.
Thank you, Jessica, and a very warm welcome to everybody. Welcome back. I hope we have some regulars rejoining us. We're going to have another season of exciting topics, and we're varying the formula a little bit because we've decided it would be good to have some guest presenters. And in fact, next event, which will be like 4 weeks from today, we'll be joined by Frank Wilczek, and the subject is going to be self-reproducing machines. And I've always worried about that. Could they get out and take over the universe or something? Well, we'll find out next time. And today we're joined by a new face. It's Cole Mathis. So he's going to act as moderator. Now, Cole did his PhD in the Beyond Center, and then he went off to work in a real live chemistry lab with sparks and bubbling test tubes and all that sort of thing. But he's come back. He's a NASA astrobiology fellow, and his main research interests are in the origin of life and life elsewhere. So I'll hand over to Cole just so he can explain a little bit how things are going to work.
Thanks for that, Paul, and thanks for everyone for joining us tonight. So I'm really happy to be here. I think this is going to be an exciting discussion. Today, Paul's going to talk about an idea that's been in the news a lot recently, but it goes back a long ways, which is, are there UFOs or unidentified aerial phenomena? Could these really be aliens sort of zooming around in the skies right under our noses? There's been some reporting about this in the popular press, in the New York Times and Washington Post, sort of following on a highly awaited US federal government report about fighter pilots and other sorts of folks seeing these things. And Paul's thought about these questions and whether we should take them seriously or what types of rigorous scientific investigations have been done into these phenomena. So I'm really excited to hear his perspective. And Sara's here as well, Sara Walker, and she's going to be sort of chiming in here and there and adding her perspective to what Paul's going to tell us about. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Cole, and I will share my screen and open up my PowerPoint and take it from the top. I hope that shows up all right. So interesting you say the subject goes back a long way. Well, I go back a long way. So I've been following this ever since I was a child. And it does, of course, address one of the big questions that we love to think about in the Beyond Center, which is, are we alone in the universe? And let me just start with a charming poem by the Roman poet Lucretius. Now, he lived in the 1st century BC, and let me just read it out. If atom stocks are inexhaustible, greater than power of living things to count, if nature's same creative power were present too, to throw the atoms into unions exactly as united now, why then confess you must that other worlds exist in other regions of the sky and different tribes of men, kinds of wild beasts. So if you cut through the quaint language, what he's doing is articulating an argument going back to Democritus, which is that if the universe is made of the same sort of stuff everywhere and the laws of physics are uniform, well, if you can have life here, surely you can have it elsewhere. And that argument gets recycled from time to time. Here is Stephen Hawking on the subject, who says, to my mathematical brain, the numbers alone make thinking about aliens perfectly rational. And Mary Wojtek, who was the director of the NASA Astrobiology Institute, says that with all the other planets around all the other stars, it's impossible to imagine that there wouldn't, that life wouldn't have arisen somewhere else. Impossible to imagine. Well, these arguments are very common. People say the universe is so big, there must be life out there somewhere. They're always saying that. And that may be right, but of course it's scientifically useless because it doesn't tell us how much life or where to look. And it's entirely possible that within the Milky Way galaxy, there might just be one other planet with life, or even none. Or it may be teeming with life. We just don't know from this general argument how much life there is likely to be. And so some people think we know the answer. Some people think that the aliens are right here, right now, flying around in our skies. And this is the subject of now called unidentified aerial phenomena. So can we take this seriously? Is this something that we can, that we should investigate as a scientific subject? Well, as Cole mentioned just recently, in fact, on the 25th of June, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence delivered to Congress a report, an assessment on unidentified aerial phenomena. Because they've been so much in the news over the last 2 or 3 years, it was felt that maybe a more serious look should be taken. And to take snippets from this report, it's not very long, you can download it on the internet. Here are 4 bullet points. The first thing is that the limited amount of high quality reporting on unidentified aerial phenomena hampers our ability to draw firm conclusions. Well, that's pretty typical sort of brush off. It says, well, we can't figure out what some of these things are, but if we knew more about it, maybe we would. So that's sort of inconclusive. Says in a limited number of incidents, UAP reportedly appeared to exhibit unusual flight characteristics. And I think this is something that anyone who's followed the news reports would puzzle over. These are objects that suddenly change direction or vanish in almost an instant, and they're not exactly defying the laws of physics, but behaving in a very strange manner from the point of view of basic Newtonian mechanics. Now, of course, the report points out, well, maybe these are the results of sensor errors or pranksters or something, and that needs further investigation. And it makes the obvious point that there's no one-size-fits-all explanation for all of these things. There's likely to be a whole range of different explanations, including, of course, the possibility that we really are being visited by extraterrestrial beings. I'll come on to that in a moment. The key point, I suppose, is at the bottom. The question is this a danger either to the military security of the United States or just to civilian aircraft? Is somebody likely to crash into one of these things? Should we take it that seriously? So a sort of mealy-mouthed response to this investigation. They looked at 144 cases, and that was the response. It was, I think, the conclusion was more eloquently expressed by Senator Marco Rubio, who said, there's stuff flying in our airspace and we don't know what it is, who it is, and it's not ours. So that's the senator's view. But there's a huge backstory, as Cole suggested, one that I've followed very closely ever since I was a child. And it's interesting to go right back in history, that is back hundreds or even thousands of years, and try to sort of figure out when people saw strange things in the sky, what was it? I'm not going to get into that here today, unless it comes up in question time. So for me, the modern era of UFOs or UAPs began in 1947, when a pilot, Kenneth Arnold, flying in the sort of Oregon, Washington state area, reported seeing a group of strange flying disc-like objects that looked like saucers skipping across a pond, I think was the terminology he used. And so immediately the press coined the term flying saucer for this. And After this was publicized, of course, people began seeing flying saucers all over the place. There were many, many examples, not just in the United States, but soon from all around the world. People were flying saucer crazy. Once you draw attention to things like this, of course, people will look up and they'll report things they don't fully understand. And so I'm talking now not just dozens of reports, but thousands and thousands of reports around the world. Pretty soon people began writing books. So this was a famous one from the 1950s by a man called George Adamski, who worked on the slopes of Mount Palomar. He wasn't an astronomer, I think he was a vendor. He claimed to have not only seen flying saucers, but seen them land and talked to their occupants in them when one of them landed in the Mojave Desert. He became a bit of a celebrity, traveled the world, and a lot of people thought, well, not only are there lights in the sky, there are actually spacecraft landing on the ground and making contact with people. This was pretty much ignored by scientists and by the government for a bit. But then the US Air Force thought, well, maybe it's serious if there are unidentified flying objects in our airspace, and maybe we have better set up an investigation. So it's sounding like deja vu. This investigation, there were actually two preceding ones, but the big one was Project Blue Book, was begun in March 1952, and it ran all the way up to the end of the 1960s. So they assembled reports, thousands and thousands of reports. So this was a really major effort. And of course, they wanted scientists' involvement, and they recruited an astronomer, Alan Hynek, from Northwestern University, as their chief scientific advisor. And he took his job very seriously. I'll tell you a little bit more about Alan Hynek in a moment, but some of you may have glimpsed him because he had a small part in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The first, second, and third kind of encounter, that was his terminology he invented. And the third kind means actual contact with the occupants of these objects. And so that's where Steven Spielberg got the title for the film. I had followed all this through my youth, but when I became a postdoc at Cambridge University at the Institute of Theoretical Astronomy in 1970, so not only a previous century, a previous millennium, it turned out that Alan Hynek was going to visit England, and I decided to invite him to come give a lecture at the Institute of Theoretical Astronomy with some trepidation. I'll show you why. So here's a picture from that time, summer 1970. And if you look at the back, you'll see this handsome fellow there. That's the young Paul Davies. I hope you're marveling over how well I've aged in the intervening 50 years. You'll also see at the front a very young-looking Stephen Hawking sitting next to a very young-looking Martin Rees. And so it was memorable that Alan Hynek was coming to talk about UFOs to this august institution. It was memorable for that reason. And for another very curious one, I was having a clear out of my office the other day, and I came across this object here. Alan Hynek gave me this. Now, what is this? This is just like a box cutter. I'd never seen one before. In 1970, they were very unusual. And so it's my memento of Alan Hynek. I subsequently visited him at his home in Chicago, just outside Chicago. And those were the days before people kept computer records. So all these UFO reports were literally typed up on dusty sheets of paper and put in files. And he had hundreds of these files in his office. He could pull one off the shelf and say, well, look at this, somebody in Minnesota saw this strange light and so on. And it was a massive, massive operation. And Hynek came to the conclusion that, of course, as I'm sure most of us would, that the vast majority of these sightings either there was insufficient information to say what it could possibly be, or if you could, it was identified as misperception, ball lightning, aircraft, balloons. There's a long list of things that people see and report as, in those days, flying saucers. So that was his conclusion. And Project Blue Book wound up in the late 1960s, just before it did. First of all, the reason I'm showing you this is to see how long ago this was. This was my car. And when I looked at the picture on the Adamski book, I thought, well, yes, it's coming very close to my very own flying saucer. So we're into ancient history here. Anyway, the Project Blue Book was summarized by Edward Condon. That name might mean something to the physicists watching here, the Frank Condon principle. Condon was a distinguished atomic physicist, an astrophysicist working at the University of Colorado, and he produced this study here. And then a panel of scientists sort of looked at this. This was a digest of Project Blue Book. They looked at this, and the conclusion, let me just say, I'll come to the conclusion in a second, but the sort of things that puzzled people were typical weird behavior, sudden accelerations of right-angled turns, or falling leaf motion and zooming off at high speeds, all the stuff that people are talking about today. Really nothing has changed in 50 years. And the conclusion, Gerald Clements, a Yale astronomer, said that on the basis of this present knowledge from Project Blue Book, the least likely explanation of UFOs is the hypothesis of extraterrestrial visitation by intelligent beings. And then basically said, all this is a waste of time. And so there the matter rested, or might have rested, at the end of the 1960s, that thousands of reports, funny sort of behavior of these objects, could be anything, inconclusive, a residue of unexplained cases, nothing to worry about, no problem for national security. And in a way, it's depressing for me now to read the reports and see the blurry pictures and so on and think, well, really nothing has changed in those 50 years. So that either means we are being continuously visited by the same sort of aliens in the same sort of spacecraft, or that really all of the mistakes and misperceptions and misidentifications that people make really haven't changed in all of that time. I want to say a little bit, because my feeling about these reports, and pretty early on in my career, I realized that it would be most unlikely we're actually being visited by extraterrestrial beings. But I've always felt that the people who report these things deserve to be taken seriously, not just sort of laughed, shrugged aside as crackpots or drunk or something like that. I think most people have genuine experiences, and probably a whole range of different experiences. And so I don't think we should belittle them. I'm going to just tell you a bit about the sort of thing that can happen, because this was a case I got involved in personally. This was a few years later, and a TV company in the north of England called me to say that they had a movie film of some UFOs over Stonehenge, and they very much like me to travel to Manchester to appear on the live TV program with the couple who took the film and to comment on what it was. So I said, okay, I'll do this. And I went to Manchester, and when I got there, I said, could I have a look at the footage, please? And they showed me what looked like some weird lights bobbing around. And I thought, I recognize that. And the reason is that I'd seen something very similar to Gatwick Airport just a little bit before. And what these things are military flares. You see a picture of one here. They get fired up into the sky, they ignite, and then they drift down slowly, leaving a smoke trail. And if this occurs, if there's a cloud base and they're fired up above the cloud, what you see lights that sort of seemingly appear in the sky that weren't there before, and like the falling leaf motion, they're drifting in the wind, exactly like that, and then they fade away. Anyway, we zoomed in, and sure enough, there were the smoke trails. Well, now the interesting thing is that with these media events, you go to something called the green room, which is where you chat to people before you go on screen, on air. And I was chatting to this couple, charming couple, and I said, well, how did you come to take this? I didn't say, well, it was just military affairs. How did you come to take this? And they said, well, we were camping near Stonehenge, and every night we saw these things and thought how amazing it was. Decided we should film them. And I said, well, it's very indistinct. Why didn't you get a bit closer? And they said, well, we tried to, but there were all these military maneuvers going on at the time. Well, anyway, when the program went live and I was asked for my opinion, I said, I think they're military flares. And this was sort of flatly denied by everybody else. And so, it's one example of how people can be mistaken by something which is unfamiliar, and they interpret it in some other way, in this case, extraterrestrial visitation. Another one, it's very common. I remember, and this happens a lot, remember a report of a very bright object in the western sky that slowly sank towards the ground and just after sunset, and was there every night. It doesn't take an Einstein to figure out that this is the planet Venus. But people, are surprised. If you're not familiar with what's in the sky, people are very surprised at how bright Venus can be. There was another case around about the same time, which I didn't investigate personally, but the BBC did. There was somebody who was in a plane and taken some movie film, very much like some of this film we're seeing today. It was through the window of the plane, and it seemed to be a blob that changed size. It seemed to zoom very close and then wiggle around a bit and then vanish with enormous speed. And it looked very mysterious. And the film crew went up and sat in the same seat and took the film and saw the same thing. And what it was the tailplane of the aircraft refracted in the curved mirror next to the seat. I'm sorry, the curved window. And of course, the slightest movement meant that this refracted image changed dramatically. So these were the sorts of things that I got involved with. The subject, it really didn't seem to go anywhere. And I thought it would probably fade away, or that with the improvement in technology and in particular cameras, that we would start getting really decent pictures of these, of whatever these things are, instead of the blurry images. But I'm disappointed that even these recent cases don't show anything other than the same sort of stuff that people were photographing all the way back in the 1960s. So I just want to finish by saying I don't totally rule out the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation, but the problem for me is the time scale. So there's something called the Fermi paradox. Enrico Fermi, famous physicist, who back in 1950 asked the question, where is everybody? Because he could see that in spite of the fact the galaxy is awfully big, it's also awfully old. And there's been plenty of time for any expansionary civilization to spread right across the galaxy and colonize it. And this hasn't happened. Earth has not been colonized by alien beings. Our planet's been here for 4.5 billion years. There were stars and planets around long before Earth even existed. If anybody wanted our planet, they could have come at any stage during that awfully long history. Why would they come now, just as human beings were getting interested in the question, are they alone? It just seems like too much of a coincidence that they will pop up now, having ignored us for not only millions, but even billions of years. So if they're out there, you would have expected them to be here already. But there is, of course, the possibility. The one thing that I feel I should say is that the idea that aliens would just sort of pop over from some star system 20 light years away, just to sort of buzz around in the skies and go away again is completely ludicrous. The resources that you would need to devote. So, for example, if you wanted to get to a 1-ton spacecraft to half the speed of light, then that would be the equivalent energy consumption of the entire United States for about a month. So that's an enormous amount of resources. That's physics. That's basic physics. You can't get around that one. So however good your technology is, there's still a huge energy burden if you wanted to do it. It would make no sense at all. But what we shouldn't rule out is the possibility that sometime during our very long history, that there has been alien technology in the solar system. I don't think the flesh and blood aliens themselves, but some sort of alien technology. And that's become of some interest. So here we see this timeline stretching all the way back, and humans just this little sliver out here on the right-hand edge. But a few years ago, I should just mention the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, known as SETI, is of course now a well-established discipline. But these people are using primarily using radio telescopes to look for messages from extraterrestrial civilizations, not look for visitation, which is what the UFO UAP phenomenon is concerned with. But a few years ago, I did take the trouble to write a paper with an ASU student on the possibility of alien artifacts on the moon. Why on the moon? Well, the moon is relatively inert. And so if any sort of alien technology had been put on the moon anytime in the last 100 million years, we might still see traces of it today. And the point is that the moon is being photographed by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, a 0.5 meter resolution. The pictures are free on the internet. You can go and take a look. And sure enough, you can see artifacts on the moon. So far, however, they are all human. And today, astrobiologists use the term techno signatures to mean looking for signs of alien technology. And the idea of techno signatures within the solar system really wasn't considered seriously 10 years ago, but now there's increasing effort to thinking, well, supposing there were alien technology in our cosmic backyard, on our doorstep, so to speak, how would we find it? What would we look for? What would be a good signature of non-human technology in this local neighborhood? So we don't just have to look way out, many light years out in space, looking for radio messages or astroengineering or anything. We can look closer to home. It's a big challenge to know what to look for. I shouldn't finish without mentioning that R.V. Loeb at Harvard takes this stuff seriously, and he suggested that the interstellar visitor Oumuamua, an object which most people describe as an asteroid that entered the solar system 3 years ago, or it was seen 3 years ago. This is the first large interstellar object that has visited. There's since been another one. So from time to time, objects will come into the solar system from another star system. But most people would interpret this as being natural, but R.V. Loeb said that there were some oddities about it, that, was it space junk or something like that? But he's created something called Project Galileo, and I agreed to join this. And the plan is not only to look for more Oumuamuas, but to set up a network of really decent, but quite small telescopes and sensors, so that when there's a UAP in the area, instead of having this sort of opportunistic blur picture on somebody's cell phone, maybe one of these instruments can spring into action and get not only visual, but infrared and radar images, something of high quality. So it might be possible to actually identify, remove the U from the UAP or the UFO. And so that's starting up sometime soon. And let me just finish by saying that any of you who are interested in this techno signatures thing, even NASA is taking it seriously now, and there's a whole techno signature seminar series. It's continuing. and you could just check that in your search engine if you wanted to join. So that I've used up my time. I've done more talking than I would normally do at these events, and with apologies to Sara, who may now wish to say something like everything I'd said was laughable. But I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and then after Sara, we can move into the Q&A part.
Yeah, Paul, that was great. I didn't want to interrupt because I was learning a lot about the history, so it was great. No, I don't have too much to add. I think the thing that I wanted to ask actually, and maybe get some insights from you and Cole about, because I've been thinking about this quite a lot lately, is more about sort of UFOs as a cultural phenomena and as modern mythology, and how that sort of mythical narrative interacts with the scientific one. And I had this thought recently about how difficult it is already to think about what the possibilities for alien life and make that detection on the scientific side. And then we have this other narrative culturally about UFOs and how we think about those things. So it's almost like we have to unlearn everything we think about aliens to learn about it scientifically and then convince people that we've actually made the discovery. And I don't know how those fields are going to interact in the future, or how we can get people on the same page about how to think about these really tough problems. I don't know if either of you have any insights into that.
Well, I certainly appreciate that it didn't start in 1947. And so during World War II, when people were very sensitized to things going on in the sky, there were reports of objects that were called foo fighters. But it goes back way before that. In the 19th century, people were seeing strange balloons where there shouldn't have been balloons, because that was the technology of the time. And then if you go right back, you can read in the Bible about Ezekiel's 4 flying wheels and chariots of fire and all the rest of it. And some people just love to say, well, the aliens were visiting at that time and they were assumed to be gods. I think the point really is that if you see something peculiar in the sky, something unexpected, maybe something slightly frightening or sinister, your brain is going to construct some sort of narrative and some image. You will see it as something, because it's very rare that humans, you see something and it doesn't make any sense. Usually it clicks in some way, and maybe in the wrong way. And it's no surprise that unexplained things in the sky would be related in terms of the pinnacle of the technology of the time. And so today, of course, it's all, spacecraft or now drones. You're increasingly hearing the word drone being used. It was just like a drone, the way it behaved. Well, we didn't have drones back in the 1960s. And so it was all in terms of the sort of saucer-shaped craft. And I think there is a really interesting aspect of this in cognitive science and how these things get interpreted. There's a whole other dimension of this when people say, well, they actually met the aliens, they were abducted by aliens. And that's a whole different subject, a rather vast one, which we don't have to get into now. But that also involves how people interpret scary or weird events.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Sara. I was also wondering the same thing. There's actually a very interesting book that's out now called American Cosmic by a professor of religious studies named, I believe her first name is Diane Poliska. If you Google American Cosmic, you can get her spelling correctly. And she has a really interesting sort of case study to this idea that you mentioned, Paul, where people sort of rationalize what they see in the sky based on the technology of the day. And there's this mass sighting from Portugal in 1917 called the miracle at Fatima, I think is how you pronounce that. And there were tens of thousands of people there, including natural scientists that have very detailed descriptions that are mostly consistent. And so I think to your point, Paul, that we shouldn't necessarily treat these people as crackpots or, dismiss this as unscientific. I think asking this question about how could we understand this, whether this is a natural phenomenon, whether this is something else, or is this just like an interaction between our social and cultural systems with natural phenomena that we don't yet understand. And maybe
Right.
maybe religious texts are examples of people trying to rationalize that through time, and our contemporary, more secular culture maybe tries to rationalize this with, as of yet, not understood technology.
Right. I think that's absolutely right. I do see that there's a bit of a danger in not taking this seriously, which is that in these sort of hair trigger times, I could well imagine, pilot of an aircraft launching some sort of missile or something at an object that looks threatening and can't be identified. It's not one of ours. Let's blow it out of the sky. I can imagine there could be some catastrophe. And so, yes, we do need to know more about it. Whether Project Galileo will succeed in clarifying some of these things. I should say, at the risk of speaking too much, that I think a lot of what I'm reading in these reports, what people are seeing are optical effects in the atmosphere, which might be a bit unusual. I mentioned about the case of the tailplane refracted in the window of the aircraft. You can get effects like that in the atmosphere. And one of the famous Navy pilot reports, the pilot said, I moved this way and it moved that way. It was mirroring my movements. Well, the word mirror to me suggests optical effect. And just straightforward mirages can be very dramatic and misleading. And so I think there are aerial phenomena to do with optics, which are not fully understood and which are potentially quite interesting scientifically. And then there's a whole subject in its own right called ball lightning, which I've taken a great interest in over the years, which has no thorough explanation, but these glowing balls can appear and float around and sometimes even come inside aircraft. Dramatic reports. There's no doubt ball lightning exists, but it's not a fully understood phenomenon. It's some sort of non-linear plasma, confined plasma thing, again, of some scientific interest. And if people see ball lightning, they're going to report it as something like a UFO.
So I think with that, we can move on to some questions. We had some that were sent in ahead of time. So I think we'll start there and then go to the ones that popped up during Paul's talk. So we had a sequence of questions submitted by Barbara Temple, who I'm sure is here. So I might take some liberties, Barbara, and ask these in slightly different questions than you sent them, but hopefully that is useful for the discussion. So Paul, I think you touched on this first one. Suppose there are extraterrestrial civilizations. As they are presumably far away from Earth, has there been enough time to have first invented the technology required and then for any of their spacecraft to reach Earth?
Yes, it's worth pointing out, and thank you, Barbara, worth pointing out that the nearest star is 4 1/3 light years away. And even if you ask a SETI optimist like Frank Drake, who founded the subject, well, in your view, how far away is the closest civilization likely to be? He used to say, I'm not sure if he's changed his mind, but several hundred light years. So even at close to the speed of light, it would take several hundred years for any sort of visitation to take place. Now, that's not a problem if you think of Fermi paradox type thing. If you're not, if this isn't tourism, if it's migration, you're simply spreading across the galaxy. Well, you could take millions of years to go from one planet to the next, and there's still plenty of time to colonize the galaxy, which hasn't happened. So time is a problem, and resources are a problem, as I mentioned earlier.
So I think that leads into this other question, which references the UAP report. And it says, some UAP appeared to remain stationary in the winds, aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of repulsion. In a small number of cases, military aircraft systems processed radio frequency energy associated with UAP sightings. If this hypothetically couldn't be attributed to sensor errors or observer misconception, what sort of technology might UAPs possibly run on? This is quite the open-ended.
Right. my first thought is, well, these would not be solid objects. They would be optical phenomena that can do these, make these sudden changes. If we are talking about actual physical objects with mass and weird propulsion systems, is it those pesky North Koreans with some sort of super technology? To me, what I've seen, it doesn't actually look like aircraft that have just some sort of souped up propulsion system. So I would be myself, if I were to look more closely at these things, very much looking for these sort of non-material phenomena. But there's been a lot of comment on whether you could achieve such accelerations, and then who would want to do it? I don't know. And let me repeat, we can't rule out that that these are use the term aliens, but we have to be very broad, because if we're into this speculative territory, these don't necessarily, well, first of all, they don't have to be inhabited by flesh and blood beings. We're talking about technology. It could be probes of some sort. And secondly, is it more speculative to suppose that these are time travelers rather than space travelers? There's always that possibility. So I love all these speculations, as you know, but I think at the end of the day, as a scientist, I tend to sort of opt for the conservative interpretation.
So I think I'll push you on one more of those speculations, and I'll ask this question. So the UAP reports describe 5 possible explanations, which is basically airborne clutter, some natural atmospheric phenomena, classified US programs, foreign adversary programs, and then finally other. So besides aliens, which is on everyone's mind, what possible other explanations do you think there could be? So you mentioned time travelers already. That was a related question.
Yes.
Wouldn't
Well,
time travelers be aliens?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm always entertained that people make a distinction.
Sorry, make a distinction between what?
Time travelers and aliens. I just classify them as unknown living things, but that's all right. Anyway, sorry, Paul, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just.
Well, I'm struggling to think what the other category could incorporate. So if we've already dealt with unusual atmospheric effects, and I can't remember what was on your list there, Cole, but it seemed to sort of cover everything. Could there be another? Well, I suppose there's always room for an other, and I don't have anything to offer in the way of speculation that's not on the list that you just read out. Sara, do you have?
Well, I can throw one in just for fun.
Yeah,
I don't know how you would quantify this, but it could be that these are mass cognitive hallucinations. So it's always possible that the other could just be peculiarities of human psychology or sociology.
Yeah, it wouldn't show up on radar though, would it? That's the problem.
That's true, yeah.
But it's not as far as we know.
Yeah.
Unless it's a mass hallucination of our technology too. Oh, it could be a hallucination of our technology too. But I was the point I was going to make that I think is interesting is sort of like there's the alien narrative where there's aliens that come from other worlds and visit us. And then there's sort of these other alien narratives that are just, there's like these hyper intelligent beings that live interdimensionally and they're sort of all around us all the time. So I think like, I'm not sure which classification of alien was intended in that, but the other sort of these, speculations are actually like space doesn't mean the same thing to them or something. But I would separate out those two distinctions of like other intelligences from what we talk about when we talk about aliens, because there's sort of like they had a natural origin in our universe the same way we originated, and and then there's this other kind of way of talking about it.
Yeah, I suppose you touched on the possibility that they don't necessarily have to have traveled across space or even through time, but they might be in some sort of parallel universe, and they've slipped through the crack or something, and they slip back again. Maybe inadvertently. Maybe they.
It was all an accident.
Yes, or some student project gone wrong.
That's right.
Yeah, Sarah, to your point about, they might interact with space and time in radically different ways. One piece of science fiction that I think touches on that in a really interesting way is Arrival. And it's not quite what you're getting at, but it's this idea that whatever these intelligences are have a very different relationship to space-time than whatever ours is. And the interaction
the
between
story
that.
is fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, you read the original story. It's so good.
So I'm going to keep going through the questions here, and I'm going to switch over to the ones in the chat, and I'll just start with the ones that came in first. So Howard asked, if aliens are real, what are the odds they would be interested in us? Is our preoccupation with UFOs more an expression of our hubris, or is there some rational reason for them?
Yeah, it's usually pointed out that if they've got this incredible technology, they would be so far ahead of us that they would have no real interest in communicating any more than we are not really interested in talking to ants. I would have to say that would surely be the case. The only reason that I imagine they could, I mentioned earlier, why would they come now? Either they would have colonized the galaxy and been here a long time ago, or they might have passed through and left some sort of traces, but again, a very long time ago. The only reason I can think of why they might actually take the trouble to come now and sort of snoop around is they see us as potentially dangerous. They realize that we're on the verge of the space age, that we're sending our own stuff out into space, and that although we can't go very far with it yet, maybe they figure that in a couple of thousand years, we might be a bit of a menace in the cosmic neighborhood. So maybe they should just sort of check on how we're getting on. So that's occasionally the speculation people have.
So Howard asked, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
No, I was going to kind of disagree with Paul on some levels because I think curiosity could drive a lot. So Paul's saying he wouldn't want to talk to an ant, but probably some people do want to talk to ants or learn about ants. And, we have plenty of entomologists.
We know some people who.
Yeah. so I can imagine. I think it's really difficult because people always want to talk about alien narratives in terms of human reasoning. And it's obviously really difficult to do that because we don't understand what universal properties entities like us might have. But I think we can't rule out the possibility that they would be curious about us.
Well, let's hope for the right reasons and that they're not thinking that we're a menace to the galaxy and should be eliminated.
Yeah, I'm a glasses, very full kind of person. So I'm always optimistic about these things, but I understand people's pessimism also.
Hopefully the alien NSF has an ethics board. So we'll see. Right, so Howard asked a similar question, Paul, to your point at the end about viewing us as a threat. And Howard asked, should we be advertising our presence? Last time worlds collided, it didn't go so well for the natives after all. And I think Stephen Hawking has famously made this point along with others.
Yes, I've always thought it's a ridiculous argument, actually, because if you've got, and now let's forget about the UFOs and just think of civilization 1,000 light years away with super duper technology so they can observe the Earth and they could figure there's intelligent life on Earth because they could, see the Great Wall of China and signs of agriculture and so on. But they're 1,000 light years away, so they're seeing Earth as it was 1,000 years ago, and there was no radio technology at that time. And so a part of the reason I think that SETI has so far led to nothing but an eerie silence is that they wouldn't start transmitting to us until they picked up our first radio signals in about another 900 years. And so that I think would explain. So I can't remember what the question was.
So it was sort of, should we be advertising our presence?
Yeah. Well, we have because our radio waves go out into space, we can't get them back, and if they've got this fantastic technology, then they already know about our planet. So if they want the planet, it's been here for 4.5 billion years. Why they don't need us to tell them, well, this is a great place to live. they would have figured that out a long time ago. So I've never thought that the only time that I feel there's a persuasive argument that we shouldn't be transmitting just sort of willy-nilly is that if we're making a serious attempt to communicate with unknown aliens, then that's not something that a few gung-ho scientists should do. It's something that we should have a big discussion. It should be humanity that would send its thoughts or ideas out there. And so just on those sorts of ethical grounds, I think there's a case for saying we shouldn't just commandeer a radio telescope and go ahead and transmit. But of course, people do. There was a time you could pay $10, I think, and your message would be sent to the aliens from a radio telescope in Florida. I think I did
great.
once. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one, and I think you might be well suited to answer it. Is it feasible that life elsewhere in the universe, assuming the same physics applies, but it is too far away for us to ever come into contact? So is there sort of an event horizon for contact between civilizations?
Is that one for Sarah?
Or for you, Paul? I think Sarah, either of you.
Sarah, do you want to say something about that, or shall I?
You can go ahead, Paul. That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, there are two types of limits, aren't there, that we have to deal with. One is the limits of physics, of fundamental physics. And of course, you could always say, well, we don't know everything, and maybe we can travel faster than light one day. But if we stick with the best physics we know, then we're stuck with the speed of light. Well, of course, it's easy enough to work out how far can you go in a certain period of time. If by contact, what you're talking about is physical visitation. If it's just sending radio messages, well, then we know they travel at the speed of light, and we can work out how far they go. But there's also limitations of engineering and technology and resources. And you have to decide what will be worth devoting. And so if what we're talking about is there a limit to the distance that humans might travel? Well, then very definitely, if you just look at what fraction of the GDP are you going to devote to sending an expedition, and it's basically not going to go very far. But people always say, well, in the future, we may have fantastic new technology, and that this would give us greater scope to explore the galaxy and beyond. And the same would be true of any alien species. And if you imagine the whole galaxy teeming with life and teeming with technological civilizations, and some of those spreading out, well, then it becomes a bit like a percolation problem in physics. You can imagine there'll always be a fastest expansion. It can't exceed the speed of light, but there'll be a fastest migration wave or exploration wave or something. And it could be that if you could take a God's eye view of the galaxy, and it really was teeming with life and civilizations, that there would be a patchwork of I don't really want to use the word empires, but sort of colonization waves and interactions and so on. It could be, there's a huge amount of complexity out there of civilizations interacting with each other and exchanging ideas and trading and so on. And we're just sort of a bit on the sidelines because we haven't spotted this yet. I must admit, I'm pretty skeptical. I don't think there is a great deal out there, but I hope I'm wrong.
Great. So I think, Sarah, I'll put this one to you. So somebody anonymous in the crowd said, if the definition of alien is life not originating on Earth, in some theories, might all life on Earth be considered alien?
Short answer, yes, because we don't know the location of the origin of life. So, and actually Paul's kind of pioneered some of these views about life possibly originating on Mars and coming here. So it's certainly within the realm of possibility that we're all aliens by that definition. But
one definition of alien is, of course, it came from outer space. And Sarah's quite right that maybe that we all came, I mean, that our ancestors came from outer space or Mars or something. But the other use of the term alien in astrobiology is life, but not as we know it. In other words, a radically alternative form of life. And so that's of great interest. Of course, we're not necessarily talking about alien technology or alien beings, intelligent beings. Might just be talking about alien microbes, but it would be enormously exciting to know that life had happened more than once. So that's the much sought after second genesis that we all hope for. And so far we've only got one form of life, and so it's possible. You can take the point of view that there is only one form of life. Life is restricted to Earth or its near environment, and that's it. That it's a bizarre chemical accident. That goes against the current trend, but it was very much the point of view when I was a student. Remember those pictures, all that time ago, and the bubble car? And that was the prevailing view. Like Francis Crick said, life seems almost a miracle, so many other conditions for it to get going. And it was very, very hard to find anybody who would take seriously the idea of any life beyond Earth. And now the pendulum has swung, but we're still just as much in the dark now as we were then.
Great. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, but it's something that sort of points to how much we really don't know about the distribution of life in the universe and sort of what plausible explanations there are for the origin of life.
Mm-hmm.
I think we might have time for one more question, and there's a couple in the chat that are along the same lines, which are essentially, how would we know alien contact when we saw it? So if SETI received a radio signal, would we be able to discern, oh, this is clearly the aliens, instead of, oh, this is some interesting abiotic phenomena deep in space?
If it's a deliberate message, then of course they should make it very obvious, like a sequence of prime numbers is the favorite one. Or my favorite is that you pick up a number which would be the fine structure constant in binary. And then you would immediately know that they understood quantum electrodynamics. That number would make me sit up and take notice. But what I suspect with SETI is that if there is an announcement, in the coming years or decades that we think we're not alone because we've got this very strange either radio signal or evidence of some weird object, some techno signature out there, that it would be, as so often in science, right on the edge of our capabilities, that our best instruments would hint at something that is out of the ordinary. But just like with the Higgs boson, it takes a while and many observations before you can build up confidence. This is really what it is. So I suspect it wouldn't come as one of these things that you open the newspaper and that's it, definitive message or definitive sign. It would be something that would be picked over and argued about for years and years and years. So is it really that? And can we do better? And can we improve our observations?
I always like to point out with the Higgs as an example that at least we had a theory.
Yes, that's right. And we had no idea what to look for with truly alien civilizations. No idea.
Yeah. So actually, Cole was a lead on a paper recently using a new theory to identify molecules as biosignatures, but it can also be applied to technosignatures. So there's this idea that you might look for complexity basically as a signature of life or intelligence in the universe, which is sort of a newer idea, and NASA's getting excited about trying to fly on some missions. So could happen.
There's a big difference, I think, between just seeing signs of non-human technology or activity, intelligent activity, and an actual message.
Yes. Yes. I think the communication part is hard. I think recognizing the signatures of life and intelligence is possible. But I think even that is going to look so much different than what we expect, that people really need to prepare for it. And we need to think harder about how to actually find it than we've traditionally been able to do.
I see we have a message, a question here from Pauline, and I feel I should address that just before we close. It says, if in the distant future the aliens are sort of diffuse plasma, is there anything about them that we'd be that we would be able to see, or could they interact even if they wanted to? Plasma is probably the wrong word, but you get the idea anyway. And plasma is actually a good word, because there certainly are science fiction novels in which the aliens are precisely, blobs of plasma. And plasma being, I've already mentioned ball lightning. So plasma balls, highly nonlinear, highly complex. You make a long list of things that plasmas do, and it begins to look like a long list of what living things do. Could we have, real live plasma blobs, and what would be going on in their plasma heads? I don't know. We can only imagine, but there certainly are science fiction stories of plasma aliens.
That's great, Paul. Thanks so much. This has been really, really awesome. Thank you to everyone that submitted questions, either ahead of time or in the Q&A. And I don't know if you have anything else, any last words, Paul or Sara?
No, except I hope people join us for Frank Wilczek talking about self-reproducing machines, because it does overlap this a bit, because if they get launched into the universe, who knows where they will go or what they will do.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Cole.
Yeah, thanks again. Sorry to everyone that asked a question that we didn't get to. Hopefully we covered many of the questions you had, and if you still have some, then I'm sure there will be many more Ask a Physicist. So we hope to have you back.
Absolutely.
Great.
Okay. Well, goodbye, everybody. Thank you for
Bye,
joining.
everyone.
Thanks. Have a good night.